Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Appreciate you joining me here for another week. I am back for another solo episode after a few weeks of sharing with you the interviews that I've been doing. And I appreciate you all listening and continue to listening. And hopefully, you've been getting some value out of those interviews that I've been doing. The tempo and the cadence for the time being is going to be 2 interviews. So you've just done those two, and then I'll do one solo show. And I'm kind of going to keep that cadence up for a little bit and just see how it goes. But let me know your feedback. Send me through some questions. Send me through some people that you'd like me to interview. Just send me through any suggestions, any feedback, or if you're enjoying it, just let me know. You can do that on the socials. So at The Unstoppable Dad on Instagram, The Unstoppable Dad Project on Facebook, and we're also making a bit of a push to try and grow the YouTube page. So The Unstoppable Dad Project on YouTube. Jump on there, give us a subscribe, give the podcast episodes a like, leave some comments, and help us grow that side of things as well. But this week, it's kind of like two topics this week that I'm going to go through. Number one is if you can start something when it's tough to start it, when you don't have time, when maybe it is not the most ideal situation for you to start something, then it is more likely to stick long term. And tied into that is that you're still going to have to do the work. Like, shortcuts are not going to be your solution for long-term success. So all of this is tied into long-term success. And the reason I wanted to make it two episodes is two topics is one, I think both topics are very, very much related because it is all about implementing new strategies, implementing new training systems, or whatever the case might be in your particular life long term. But it's all revolving around change, and specifically long term change. And it relates back to something that I talk about a whole bunch, which is just building consistency. Whenever it comes to any form of change that you want to make within your life, trying to build that consistency is going to be the number one thing. And consistency is going to look different for everybody. It's going to, for some people, if we're talking about, say, implementing some form of training, it may be 3 times a week for some people. It may be 5 times a week for others. It's all going to come down to your individual set of circumstances. And what I'm going to go through on today's episode is going to be no different. It is going to be very much dependent on your own individual set of circumstances. And when it comes to any advice that I give out, when it comes to any topic that I cover off, we need to inherently understand that while the strategies and tactics that are discussed or are used can be applied across multiple sets of circumstances, it is not always necessarily going to apply to you. But, and I guess I'm getting to the second part of this podcast first, you still need to do the work. There is not going to be any magic solution that is going to fix something that you are unable to implement or something you are unable to do in the short term. And the reason I'm bringing this up this week is I've had a couple of reoccurring conversations with people specifically around injuries. And given the type of people that I work with, we're talking about predominantly men, but also women in their 30s and 40s. Generally, their parents, they've got a lot going on. They've got jobs, they've got kids, like at different stages of their kids' lives, but there's always a lot going on. Everyone's busy, and that's just the reality of the world and the reality of life. But they want to start spending some time for themselves. They either think that their physical well-being starting to slip. They think that maybe their mental well-being starting to slip because they're unable to do that. But they want to start to implement these things. But one of the things that has held them back is injuries, like prolonged injuries. And I'll share a story. There's a gentleman that I coach who he has a little bit of plantar fasciitis going on. And it's only just started in the last couple of weeks. So we've started, and there's a whole bunch of things that may have contributed to that. Work shoes, lifestyle choices, you name it, it's probably a factor that's kind of started to cause this inflammation around his feet. And he's tried a couple of different things, and he's getting some suggestions from not professionals, but other people that he should be going and getting a cortisone injection. Now, before I go down this rabbit hole, let me just preface this by saying sometimes it is needed to do that. It is not. I'm not saying this to completely shit on the fact that some people take cortisol injections for particular inflammation within their body, which is causing them potentially debilitating pain. It is not to dismiss that at all. It is just talking about this particular context and the fact that it is very, very early on in the piece. We haven't even tried too much. We haven't even done a lot of work in order to correct it. And our conversation has been around, and he's definitely on board with this, is that we've got to try a few things first before we just go down the path of just jabbing ourselves. Now, no one from a professional standpoint, physiotherapists or anything like that, has actually recommended that at this point. But there has been a lot of people, a lot of noise in his immediate circle who are suggesting to him that this is the path that he should take. And for me, that's kind of the last door that we should look into. But before we get to that last door, there is a lot of work that needs to be undertaken in order to get to that path. And a lot of people that I come across are very quick to pull the trigger on the last door without actually exploring the initial avenues that they need to in order to get to that point. And brings me back to my second point, like the work has to be done at some point. It doesn't matter whether it's the same as when it comes to having a good base level of fitness or having a reasonable level of strength. In order to get those things, there has to have been some work done at some point in order to build that capacity. There isn't at this point, and this may change as we delve into what is happening within medical science and especially like biology, what's becoming more available to us at this point in history. But at this point, there is no magic pill to increase your fitness level or increase your strength level. The only way to do that is to do the work. And sometimes we need to take the same mindset and the same approach with other areas if it pertains to injury. We have to understand if we get injured, as much as it sucks, and there is a mental element that needs to be overcome. And I've done a few episodes on steps that you should be looking at mentally and physically if you are injured. But we have to go into the rehab process with the understanding that if we actually want this to succeed long term and not just take a short term fix, like potentially a cortisone injection should be for some people, and some people may need the cortisone injection initially, but then they do the work in the background to improve underlying issues, increase their strength, address movement deficiencies, and do all that work in the background so that they don't need it again, or that so the likelihood of the injury reoccurring is lessened, or if it does reoccur, the severity is diminished. It's not as bad when it does reoccur. But in order to get to that point, you have to do the work, and the work takes time. Doesn't matter whether you're building a business, whether you're even working on your own mental health, right? Like it's a process. It's something that you've got to undertake, and you've got to do the work, and you've got to really commit to the process of becoming better at it. And this is something that keeps coming up a lot in conversations that I'm having is people are busy. Everybody's busy. And it's varying degrees, right? And some people know, and we can talk about priorities and prioritizing their time correctly, core values. Joey did it. We did the episode with Joey that was released last week where he spoke about like his take on core values, which was really good. So if that's something that you're struggling with and you kind of want to get something down on paper for yourself, go back and listen to that. But when we can talk about all that stuff, and that's all very well and good and having our ducks in the row, but then we've got to make sure that we prioritize the time in order to do the work that's necessarily in order to move things forward, whether it's injury rehab, whether it's working on our mental health. Like we have to commit the time to do it. And when we're busy, it's very hard to sometimes justify that time in our own mind to move these things forward because we think that everything else is so important. And I personally believe that nothing's more important than yourself. You can't serve your family well if you are not in a good headspace, if you are not in a good physical space, like if you're struggling with those things, you need to really prioritize the time to address those things, because that's going to be bleeding into every other area of your life. Whether you recognize it or not, it is going to do that. So you do need to at some point make the decision to prioritize that time. But because we're all busy and we've got a lot of things going on, it can be sometimes hard to kind of take a beat and go, all right, what, like, I can start this thing now, or I can do this thing. And the second point of today's episode is, if you start something when you are busy, it's going to be more likely to stick. And another client that I work with, I've had a conversation with him this week, and we were talking about his journey, and we've been working with each other for a while, about over 12 months, and it's been a process to get to this point. So he's done the work to get to this point. But in the past, what would happen is he would get really busy with work, and his training would drop off, his eating would drop off, and his mental, his mental, what's the word for it? His happiness with where he was at with his progress, with his health would dip as well too. And you could tell, like, we would do weekly check-ins, we'd do weekly calls where we'd check in, we'd see how everything's going. And it was more just a general chat around, like, what are the steps we need to do for the next week in order to move things a little bit forward. And over the last 12 months, we've gradually got to the point where at the moment, he is super busy. He has so much going on with his work that it is like he's still struggling to find time, but he's doing the things that he's set out for himself to do. He's ticking the boxes when it comes to his training. Now, we've made some pretty major changes within his training, where what we do is we actually only do 6 15-minute sessions a week. And that's seemed to work very well for him. And this comes back to one of the other points I've made today, and I constantly make, like, context is important, and having a plan that's going to work for you. Like, there is an element where you're going to be able to find time. We just need to work out what that is and how that fits within your life. Because some people, it will be 15 minutes, 6 or 7 days a week. Others, it might be 30 minutes, 4 days a week. Some other people might be lucky enough where they're going to be able to find an hour to 90 minutes 3 times a week. It's going to be different for everybody. And then having a plan that all you need to do is act on is going to be that thing that is going to help. And if you can implement that plan when you are hyper busy, and this links back to the conversation we were having, where he knows in 2 weeks' time, things are going to start to ease off for him a little bit. He's going to have a bit more breathing space, has another staff member starting, like, all these things, he's ticking all these boxes, and he recognizes this, and he knows, like, hey, I'm still doing it now when it's busy. How much easier is it going to be when I get quiet? And we've finally started to turn that corner after he's done all this great work over the last 12 months, where it's like, all right, we're looking down the barrel of this becoming part of his life, and he's started to build that consistency after times where it's dipped and it's flowed, and maybe he hasn't been as consistent as he's liked, and as a result, he hasn't gotten the results that he's wanted. And now we're starting to rebuild that consistency across a couple of different areas as it pertains to his overall health and well-being, and he's doing amazingly well. But we've come to that realization that rather than throwing the baby out with the bathwater when you are so busy, you need to make a concerted effort to make it work. Because if you can make it work while you are busy, it is going to fit, and it is going to become much easier when you are not, rather than the flip side of that, which is what a lot of people do. And I can speak to this from experience, not only from the people that I've coached and seeing it over the last 15 years, especially when it comes to training, like the number, I'll start this when it's a little bit quieter. When I get to this point, and there is always going to be something that comes up, right? Like, the amount of times that I've heard, I will do this when it gets quieter, or I will start this when this happens. And it's the reason they want to start this, because they know it's important to them. They're not being forced to start it. Like, it's important to them. And it's a little piece to add on to the bottom of that. Like, if it's important to you, you've got to find a way to get it, to implement it and do it even when you are busy. But by starting that when you're busy, when it becomes quieter, it will be more sustainable to stick long term. And all too often, we never start, and we just keep putting it off because things keep coming up. The thing that's making us busy right now may not be the thing that's making us busy in 8 weeks' time, but there's probably going to be something else that's going to be making us busy. Another one of our kids has another commitment, so that's going to make us it's making us busy in a different way. And yes, sometimes we just do need to hold off for a week or two. But if you are in that mindset where you're like, hey, I'm going to hold off until this thing finishes, put a date on it. Like go into like on this day, I am starting back regardless of what happens. Rather than what I tend to see a lot of is when things quieten down, I'll do it, because that is not, you're not holding yourself to a standard at that point. You are just giving yourself something in the future where you don't have a date and you're not quite sure when it is, and you need something to stick to, and then you need to follow through with it. Like everything we've talked about on the past here, if you want to start to build self-confidence and you need to build a track record of sticking true to following through what you said you're going to do. And sometimes you're going to do something for 6 weeks and maybe it's not a good fit for you, and that's okay. But at least you've tried. At least you've done the work to be able to make an informed decision on the fact that maybe you need to pivot and you need to try something else. And even that's okay. But the underlying thing is you still need to do the work and you still need to give it a go for a reasonable period. When it comes to like training and health stuff, like my rule of thumb is like a minimum 12 weeks. You need to give things a minimum 12 weeks to see if it's actually going to stick, because 1 or 2 weeks is not enough to get to get any evidence that it's going to move anything in a favorable direction for yourself. 12 weeks as the bare minimum. If you can commit 6 months to something, if we're looking at it from a straight training point of view, it doesn't matter if you get to the end of it and you're like, I don't really enjoy that, I'm going to go try something else. If you've done something that's well structured, if you've done something that you've been able to be consistent with, there will still be a payoff for you. There will be potentially improved fitness, improved strength. Like you will still have a payoff with that after 12 weeks or 6 months, even though you've gotten to the end of it and you're going, you know what? I haven't enjoyed this. But the other thing, the byproduct of that is you've followed through on something you've committed to. And that is then going to serve you very well when you go move into something that maybe, or try something else that you enjoy, that you think you're going to enjoy more. So implementing things when we feel we're too busy to do it, as much as it's going to cause a little bit of extra stress and it's going to make us uncomfortable, is going to help you be more consistent long term. And sometimes stress is good. And sometimes we underestimate what we are capable of doing because we're a little bit scared of putting ourselves through that stress. And I'm speaking to that from personal experience. If I want to talk back on like the podcast itself, doing these interviews, I had convinced myself for a point that I was too busy to do that. And then when I just pulled the trigger and started booking guests, I realized that I was still able to do the other thing. I was able to make time for it. And I was able to still do the other things that I was committed to do and do them well. I just had to apply myself to it. So in that instance, like I was capable of taking on more than I thought I was. Like I thought I was maxed out, but I wasn't. There's probably going to be a point where maybe I'll have a bounce back and I'll pay for that. But sometimes we underestimate ourselves and what we're actually capable of. So if you're kind of on the fence about it, and that mental energy that we're expending, I'm digressing for a little bit, that we're expending in worrying about whether we should implement that or not. If we spend that same energy on actually doing the thing, sometimes the results that we can see from that is going to be more than what we have to spend on the worry and the concern about like how busy we are. Like just going and doing it is going to yield a better payoff for us, which is going to outweigh the amount of stress that we're going to experience in trying to implement these changes. So making sure that you look, and again, everything is context specific. So if you need some help implementing something like a health and fitness regime, or you just want to have a chat about how things are going to fit into your life, and you want, an honest outside opinion on that, please reach out. That's what I've been doing with a lot of people for the last 15 years, is trying to help them implement things into busy lives. I gave you an instance of somebody that I've worked with, which is a little bit of an out of the box thinking compared to what you may see other people or hear other people say. And if you need help with that, please reach out. Drop me a message on Instagram, on Facebook. Leave a comment on the YouTubes. We're on TikTok as well too, so trying to get across most of the socials. But yeah, reach out. But firstly, to close off, you are capable of a lot more than what you think you are capable of. And if it is important to you, you will be able to fit it in. And sometimes, rather than waiting for the exact right time, implementing it when we're busy is actually going to be a better move for our long-term success, even though it's going to cause us a little bit more short-term discomfort. So thank you so much for listening again. I'll be back next week with another interview. And then from there, as I said, every 3 weeks, I'll drop a solo podcast covering off some topics like I just did today. And 2 weeks of interviews, one solo podcast. And let me know what you think. Have a great week. I'll talk to you next week. Goodbye.